Billionaire slipped on ice outside the diner. Waitress helped him up, not knowing he'd change her life. What if a single moment of kindness could change 2 lives forever? Outside Murphy's diner on a bitter February morning, ice covered the sidewalk like glass. The snow had been falling since midnight, blanketing the small town of Cedar Falls in clean white. Inside the warm diner, 36-year-old Claire wiped down tables, her rough hands moving with practiced skill. She'd been working double shifts for months, saving every penny she could. The bell above the door rang constantly as local people sought shelter from the cold, ordering coffee and sharing stories about the unexpected snowstorm. Claire smiled at each customer, her real warmth cutting through the winter chill. She had no idea that in just a few minutes her life would take an extraordinary turn. Sometimes the universe has a way of placing exactly the right people in exactly the right place at exactly the right moment. Where are you watching from today? Claire had grown up in Cedar Falls, watching seasons change through the diner's windows. Her grandmother had worked these same tables 40 years ago, and the owner, Mrs. Patterson, treated Claire like family. Every morning brought familiar faces, farmers grabbing coffee before dawn, teachers stopping by before school, elderly couples sharing breakfast in comfortable silence. Claire knew their usual orders, their stories, their struggles. This job meant everything to her, not just for the modest paycheck, but for the sense of belonging it provided. Her apartment above the hardware store was small but cozy, filled with books from the library and plants she'd rescued from the clearance rack. She dreamed of opening her own cafe someday, somewhere with big windows and mismatched chairs where people could linger over conversations. The old coffee tin hidden behind her flour canisters contained $3,000. Her entire life savings accumulated 1 tip at a time. Outside, a sleek black car crept carefully down Main Street, its driver unfamiliar with small-town winter driving. Behind the wheel, 42-year-old Daniel pressed the phone to his ear, his voice tense with frustration. "No, I can't reschedule the Henderson meeting. I'm already 3 hours behind because of this weather." His company had just bought a chain of rural properties, and Cedar Falls was his final stop before returning to the city. Daniel had built his fortune through careful investments and constant determination, but lately success felt hollow. His penthouse apartment overlooked the city. Yet, he felt more isolated than ever. Relationships had withered under the pressure of endless work, and simple pleasures seemed like luxuries he couldn't afford to enjoy. The car slid slightly as Daniel turned into the diner's parking lot. Through the frost-covered windows, he could see warm light and people moving inside. It looked inviting, like something from a movie about simpler times. He needed coffee and directions to the Henderson property, nothing more. As he stepped out of the car, his expensive leather shoes found the icy pavement. For a successful man who controlled million-dollar deals, he had surprisingly little experience with winter weather. The first step felt steady enough, but as he reached for his briefcase, physics took over. The fall happened in slow motion. Daniel's feet slipped forward while his upper body tilted backward, arms spinning helplessly as his briefcase scattered papers across the snowy ground. He landed hard on his back, the impact knocking the wind from his lungs and sending his phone sliding under a parked truck. For a moment, he lay there stunned, staring up at the gray sky as snowflakes melted on his face. Inside the diner, Claire had been refilling the coffee station when she heard the commotion. She glanced outside and saw a man in an expensive coat sprawled on the ice, papers blowing around him like confused birds. Without hesitation, she grabbed her own worn jacket and rushed outside, her practical boots finding sure footing on the dangerous surface. "Oh my goodness, are you hurt?" Claire knelt beside Daniel, her voice filled with genuine concern. Her warm brown eyes searched his face for signs of injury, and her gentle hands helped him sit up slowly. "Take your time. Don't try to get up too fast." Daniel found himself looking into the kindest face he'd seen in years. Here was someone who had dropped everything to help a complete stranger, asking nothing in return. "I think I'm okay," he managed, though his back ached and his pride hurt worse than anything else. "Just slipped. The ice is terrible today. Here, let me help you up." Claire stood and extended her hand, her grip surprisingly strong as she helped him to his feet. She moved with easy confidence, gathering his scattered papers while keeping one eye on his stability. "You're not from around here, are you? These winters take some getting used to." As they collected his belongings, Claire noticed the expensive watch, the tailored coat, the way he carried himself despite the fall. But she treated him exactly the same as she would any customer, with respect and kindness. This simple humanity touched something deep in Daniel's chest, a feeling he hadn't experienced in years. "Thank you," he said quietly, meaning it more than any business deal he'd ever completed. "You didn't have to help." Claire smiled, the expression transforming her entire face. Of course I did. That's what neighbors do. She gestured toward the diner. Come inside and warm up. Coffee is fresh, and you look like you could use something hot. If this moment touched your heart, please give the video a thumbs up. Sometimes the smallest acts of kindness create the biggest changes. What Daniel didn't know was that his fall had been witnessed by more than just Claire. Across the street, Henderson, the property owner he was supposed to meet, watched through his office window, making mental notes about character. Inside the warm diner, Daniel discovered a world he'd forgotten existed. Claire brought him coffee without being asked, the ceramic mug warming his hands as steam rose between them. Around him, conversations flowed naturally, discussions about the weather, concern for elderly neighbors, plans for the upcoming church fundraiser. This wasn't the polished networking of his business world. This was real community. I'm Claire, by the way, she said, settling across from him during a quiet moment. I should probably know everyone who comes through here, but I don't recognize you. Daniel, he replied, studying her face. There was something peaceful about her presence, an authenticity that made him want to lower his guard. I'm here on business, actually, real estate. Claire's expression shifted slightly, and Daniel caught the change. Oh, she said quietly, her hands wrapping more tightly around her own coffee cup. Are you working with Henderson? The question hung in the air with unexpected weight. Daniel nodded, and he watched something sad flicker across Claire's features. Is there a problem with that? Claire looked around the diner, at Mrs. Patterson behind the counter, at the farmers discussing their struggles, at the worn but comfortable furniture that had served this community for decades. Henderson's been buying up properties all over town, she said softly. Folks are worried about what comes next. For the first time, Daniel felt the human cost of his business dealings. He'd spent months reviewing financial projections and market analyses, but he'd never considered the faces behind the numbers. What kind of worried? He asked, though part of him dreaded the answer. Well, Mrs. Patterson's been trying to hold on to this place, but the taxes keep going up. Henderson's made offers on half the buildings on Main Street. Claire's voice remained gentle, but Daniel could hear the underlying concern. People here don't have many options. Some families have been in this town for generations. Daniel stared into his coffee, seeing his reflection waver in the dark surface. His success had always been measured in quarterly reports and profit margins, but sitting here listening to Claire, he began to understand what those numbers actually meant. Real people, real lives, real communities. The bell above the door chimed, and Henderson himself walked in, his eyes immediately finding Daniel. There you are, Henderson called out, his voice carrying across the quiet diner. Ready to close some deals? Have you ever faced a moment that changed how you see everything? Let us know in the comments. Daniel stood slowly, very aware that his next decision would ripple far beyond this small diner. Henderson's handshake was firm, his smile confident as he gestured toward a corner booth. Sorry about the delay, but weather's weather, right? He spread several contracts across the table, his pen already moving. I've got 3 more properties lined up after our meeting, so let's make this quick. Daniel found himself looking back at Claire, who was carefully avoiding their conversation. While serving other customers, her earlier words echoed in his mind as Henderson outlined plans for tearing down several buildings to make way for a shopping complex. The numbers were impressive, the profit potential enormous, but Daniel couldn't stop thinking about Mrs. Patterson's weathered hands and the way Claire had helped him without expecting anything in return. The Patterson property is the keystone, Henderson continued, pointing to a highlighted section. Once we get the diner, the rest falls into place. I've been wearing down the old lady for months. She can't afford the upcoming tax assessment. Something cold settled in Daniel's stomach. Mrs. Patterson owns this place for now, but she's behind on payments, and I've got friends at the county office. Henderson's smile turned mean. Sometimes you have to apply pressure where it counts. Daniel's pen remained motionless above the signature line. Across the diner, he watched Claire refill an elderly man's coffee, her smile genuine as she asked about his grandchildren. This was what Henderson wanted to destroy, not just buildings, but the heart of a community. I need a moment, Daniel said quietly, standing from the table. Henderson's eyebrows rose. It's a simple signature, Matthews. We've been planning this for months. But Daniel was already walking toward the counter, his decision becoming clear with each step. Claire looked up as he approached, her expression curious but guarded. Mrs. Patterson, he called softly to the older woman behind the register. Could I speak with you for a moment? What happened next surprised everyone in the diner, including Daniel himself. Instead of representing Henderson's interests, he found himself explaining the development plans, warning Mrs. Patterson about the pressure tactics and offering something unexpected. his protection as an investor who could outbid Henderson for the properties. The transformation in the room was immediate. Henderson's face darkened with fury, but the relief in Mrs. Patterson's eyes was worth every dollar Daniel was about to spend. If you've been enjoying this story, subscribe to our channel for more heartwarming tales. Claire stared at Daniel in amazement, finally understanding that sometimes angels arrive in expensive coats carrying briefcases instead of wings. 6 months later, Main Street buzzed with a different kind of energy. Instead of demolition, renovation had breathed new life into the old buildings. Daniel had purchased not just the properties, but Henderson's entire development package, transforming the aggressive expansion into thoughtful preservation. The diner remained exactly as it was, while the buildings around it became artist studios, a community center, and affordable housing for young families. Claire stood outside her own cafe, watching Daniel hand-paint the final details on her sign. Falling Snow Cafe curved across the window in elegant letters with smaller text underneath, where every cup tells a story. Her dream had come true through Daniel's investment, but more importantly, through the trust they'd built together. "You know, I never thanked you properly," Daniel said, wiping paint from his hands with a rag that had seen better days. He'd traded his expensive suits for jeans and flannel shirts, finding more satisfaction in manual work than he'd ever discovered in boardroom negotiations. Claire laughed, the sound carrying the warmth that had first captured his attention. "For what? You're the one who saved the whole town." "For helping me up," Daniel replied seriously. "Not just from the ice, but from the life I was living." He'd moved to Cedar Falls permanently, establishing a foundation that supported small-town businesses across the region. His city penthouse sat empty while he rented a small apartment above the hardware store 3 doors down from Claire's place. Mrs. Patterson emerged from the original diner, carrying a steaming plate of her famous apple pie. "You two stop working and eat something," she scolded gently, though her eyes sparkled with affection. The stress lines had disappeared from her face, replaced by the contentment of knowing her life's work would continue. The late afternoon sun painted everything golden as the three of them sat on the cafe's front porch, sharing pie and watching neighbors wave as they passed. Daniel had discovered that true wealth wasn't measured in bank accounts, but in the richness of relationships and the peace that came from living with purpose. Claire reached over and took his hand, her fingers intertwining with his naturally. "Did you ever imagine that slipping on ice could lead to all this?" Daniel squeezed her hand gently, amazed at how completely his life had changed. "Best fall I ever took," he said, and meant every word. The snow began falling again, but this time it felt like a blessing rather than an obstacle. Sometimes the greatest treasures are found not in what we plan, but in what we never see coming. If you enjoyed this story, please remember to like, leave a comment with your thoughts, and subscribe for more heartwarming tales. Thank you for joining us on this journey of discovering that kindness truly can change everything.